So my name's Dorothe Kaufmann, and I now live in Edinburgh, but I was born in Moshi in Tanzania at the foot of Kilimanjaro to parents who had come from Germany. My father's family needed to leave because the beginning of the 1930s, being Jewish, they were made stateless. So there was an opportunity to leave Germany in 1936 when the Olympic Games were in Berlin. My mother followed him. She wasn't married at that time, but she went out in the end of the 30s, and they got married once she was there. So we lived out in the country, and very soon after the war started, the Jewish people, well, the German people in this case, they were interned because they were German. So first we had to leave Germany because my father was Jewish, then we were uprooted again because the family was German. However, long story short, when I was 7 my mother, when I was young, she read Bible stories to me and we talked about Jesus, but nothing very deep or significant that I can remember. I went to boarding school at 7, and in those days most places were Christianly orientated by default. That was in the 40s. So I soon made friends with people. It was difficult for me though at first because I'd only spoken German till this point in time. So I had to be really quick with learning the English, but there were a few people. My cousin was there, he spoke German, as did another Swiss girl. And so when I went to secondary school, as we called it there, secondary school, I had to go to Nairobi in Kenya. It was a girls' school, and that also had a Christian ethos. It was only Europeans at that time, and there was a lovely family who led a scripture union class, I think, periodically, and the scripture lessons were all to do with Christian things. Other religions hadn't been introduced to the syllabus. However, there was also an opportunity to go to a Crusader class outside of the school once a week on a Sunday, and one of the attractions was to have a lovely tea after the talk. And I also enjoyed singing the choruses. It was a very godly orientated meeting. The family who put it on were brethren. One day they had invited an evangelist from South Africa, and he chose to speak on Revelation chapter 3 verse 20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. So Revelation 3:20 says, I'm reading from the Complete Jewish Study Bible by David Stern and others, and it says, here I am standing at the door knocking. If someone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he will eat with me. So I wanted to eat with Jesus, and Jesus to eat with me, so I asked him then to come into my heart, as they say these days. So anyway, nothing much changed. I had another friend who was a Christian, but she was much more zealous than me. They were lovely, actually, looking back. There were quite a few very zealous Christians at that school. But I didn't take it as seriously, for want of another word. So when I finished school, I got my Cambridge School certificate, and I came to England in 1956. That's right. And I did a secretarial course because I didn't know quite what career I wanted to pursue. It was wonderful because my father had arranged for me to stay at the YWCA, and I was sharing a room with a Methodist Christian who was doing her physiotherapy. And she was lovely, and I'm not sure if she came to I went anyway to a Church of England just down the road from where the hostel was. And it was a lovely, godly church, and a couple took me in as their daughter, invited me to lunch every Sunday, which was lovely. And they held a Crusader class for, I think, girls and boys. And by this time I was one of the helpers, which was lovely. And so that continued till I'd finished my secretarial course, and then I worked for a year in a medical social worker's office. However, that didn't go down very well because I didn't always write what she had dictated, so I thought, well, this is just too difficult. I think I'll be a nurse. But I didn't want to be a general nurse, so I went for children's nursing in Great Ormond Street, which really pleased my father no end. However, I didn't really like that because I was older than the rest of my colleagues, and they treated me so juvenilely. I didn't like that. However, at the end of the training it said you can't get anywhere in nursing with just children's nursing. You need to do your adult nursing. We call it general nursing here in the UK. So I returned to Leeds, where I had done the secretarial work, and returned to the church where I had been at, and I really got more involved in the church, and as far as I helped with the nursing station at the church. It was called the Crypt, and I believe it's still going now. The homeless, wandering, usually just men, came for soup and bread, and also for any first aid necessities and getting fresh socks and shoes sometimes. It was a very worthwhile ministry. So after that, having done my general, they said, oh, well, you can't get anywhere with just general, you need to do your midwifery. Nursing was structured a bit differently in those days. It was all hands-on in the wards. It was no university academia. The stress was on practicalities, which I think is a very good way of doing things. So anyway, I went to do my midwifery. That in those days was 2 parts. So I did the first part in Leeds, where I was at the time, and then went to Bromsgrove in the Midlands. And there we did our midwifery on the district, delivering women at home. So having got all 3 qualifications under my belt, I thought, right, it's time to go back to Africa, which is where I feel at home and am at home. So, well, how do I get to Africa? So my parents knew the doctor at the local mission hospital, which happened to be a Lutheran hospital, and the doctor in charge was German. So he said, oh, I'll see what I can do and write to the mission organisation in Germany and see if they will sponsor you. So I went for my interview in Germany and was given the job on the children's ward, and also the TB and leprosy units and baby clinic were assigned to me. But in a hospital you do other things, so I was on the call for the midwifery for the labour ward. It was a mission hospital, as I was saying, a Lutheran mission hospital, so there were folks from many different nations. There were Americans, Scandinavians and Germans in the main, and that was a lovely mix because we got on very well. There were no other people from the UK because after all it was a Lutheran mission. So after 3 years there, my contract came to an end, but meantime another Lutheran hospital had been built in Moshi, which is where I was born, and the same doctor who had been on the mission hospital, Dr. Walter, he was now in charge of the hospital in Moshi, so he was happy to employ me in Moshi, where in fact I did the children's ward and general surgical. However, after 3 years, my time in Africa, yes, you would think, oh yes, she was a missionary. No, I didn't really feel myself to be a missionary, because that was home, and that was home. So this missionary label didn't really fit. I didn't go to Bible studies at the first hospital, Bumbuli, and I didn't go to Bible studies in Moshi either. I found my time was filled with riding and the outdoor life. So after 3 years, the policy in Tanzania was Africa is for the Africans, so the Europeans can return to Europe. So I thought, well, okay. So that was Goodbye Africa in 1973. So I came to Scotland, which is where my sister and parents had settled. And at the time there was a block in the National Health for employing nurses because they were having a hard time because of the oil blockade after the Yom Kippur War. So I thought, oh dear. But it was a good time because my mother needed to find a flat because she had been staying with had been house sitting her daughter's, my sister's house, because her sister was in the Seychelles at the time. So together we found the flat in which I am now, which is just lovely. Really roomy, central, has a garden and meets all my needs. So we found this flat. It was miraculous because we'd seen another flat first. We said, oh yes, we like this one, although we'd been told, no, it's not a good idea to get that one. But anyway, in the nick of time, we could, thankfully our solicitor was a friend, so we phoned him up at home and said, oh no, don't get that other one, we want this one here, but we need to have the money on the table tomorrow morning because it's first come, first served, it was fixed price. So thankfully we got the flat and we were able to move in before I got my next job, which happened to be in Germany, because my friend from the mission station had a sister in Germany who was the matron of an orthopedic hospital, and she was needing a ward sister for the children's ward. So I think it was a case of not what you know, but who you know. So I got that job, which really I wasn't qualified for, and I'm amazed that the nurses got put up with me. So I think I was there for about 3 years before I realised I didn't want to be stuck in children's orthopedics for the rest of my life, but wanted to get back into general, so I found a job in a nearby hospital on the orthopedic ward. People don't really like orthopedics because it's so heavy, but I didn't like the particular ward I was assigned to because they were very unkind to me, long story short. So I was put in a surgical ward, which was really lovely, a lovely Christian sister, and she really got a good team spirit among her staff. So there again, I wasn't particularly interested in my Christian walk, although every day I would read the Bible and go to church and tithe and do the things as far as I knew was what the Lord wanted me to do. So what happened next? Yes, in the second hospital, my friend, I soon made friends with a lovely young, well, we were all young at the time, who had been a missionary in Nigeria, and she'd come back maybe for the same reason. But we got on very well. But I also met another nurse who was a bit more go-ahead, and so we used to go riding and skiing together. And being South Germany, there was also an open-air pool, so there was lots of outdoor fun again. And Christianity, in inverted commas, wasn't really my main focus at the time. So the church we used to go to was the Lutheran church, but that really I didn't understand most of the time what they were trying to say. But thankfully there was a Church of the Nazarene, which was run by the Americans, and it was more like what I'd been used to. When I was at school, I was confirmed, so being a Christian had always meant a lot to me. However, things were cut short in Germany when my sister's late husband had a road traffic accident after work in Suriname, South America. So she came back to Edinburgh with her 2 young children, 8 and 6, and my mother was already living here in the flat that we'd bought for her. But thankfully the flat we'd bought had 2 bedrooms. So I thought, well, that's great. I'll go and be in the small bedroom, which is where I'd spent my holidays, and move over and help my mother and help my sister with the children. So I upped sticks and came to Scotland. Well, before I left Germany, I had saved up to visit my sister in Suriname. So I had this money and I thought, what am I going to do with this money now? So my friend said, well, why don't you come to Israel with me? We'll just go and hire a car, and I've got some friends there, we'll go and visit them. So that's what we did. We had a great time. And they said, oh, now you'll be nowhere else where you want to go but Israel. So I thought, okay, well, we'll see about that. So when I was back in Edinburgh, well, I lived up back in Edinburgh, when I was in Edinburgh living with my mum, we got on really well. She was very easy to live with. She had a heart of gold, did all the shopping, all the cooking, all the cleaning, I have to confess. And I just made sure I went to work and earned some money, as you do at that age. So I went to her church, which was a local church of Scotland, which was okay. But when my mother passed on and we got a way out minister, I thought, no, I can't stay here. I'll go to a Episcopal church, which is a bit further away, but one of my friends from my hospital in Tanzania, she was going there with her husband, so I thought, well, let's go there. And that was okay. They were very evangelical and the fellowship was good. And then this is where, when I was there, things changed. At that time, I wanted to concentrate because I thought, well, if I go to Israel, I'll need to learn Hebrew, because when I was in Africa, I soon realized that the nurses weren't translating for these expatriate doctors what the patients had actually said, nor were they telling the patients what the doctor had said. So I thought, well, no, I don't want that to happen to me, so I better learn Hebrew if I'm going to Israel. So I found a course at the university that taught Hebrew, so that's what my start of Hebrew. And so all through the 80s, I was learning Hebrew and going on different visits to Israel. Youth hosteling, usually I went on my own. I was a bit of adventurous spirit, I guess, and just got to know people. Then in the 90s, that's right, at the end of the 80s, I believe it was, that my mother passed away. So then I was a free agent in the 90s, and I made a new friend who had been in Israel for a long time, had married a Jewish Messianic believer. She was from Holland and a great evangelist, wonderful, so fluent with, could bring every conversation round to Jesus. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. And so we were good friends for a long time. She's still alive now, thankfully, but not very well. But she's being well cared for in a care home. So this is me back in Scotland now, learning Hebrew and visiting Israel. And at the beginning of the 90s, one of the patients that I was nursing in the hospital had been a missionary to the Jewish people in Leeds, in fact, in England. But she's 93 meantime and living in Edinburgh. But she had hurt her thumb and was just recuperating till she was well enough to go home. However, she was never well enough to stay at home for long, so she went into a residential home where I visited her for long enough, all the time basically. And she had a carer who took the magazines I was bringing about Israel to her, to a carer who took the magazines to friends of hers. So these friends, Lo and Mirel, said, oh, where are you getting these magazines from? Oh, one of Dorothe, I think Gail was a carer in this home. So one of my clients' visitors brings these magazines. Oh, they said, really? We'd love to meet that lady. So it was arranged that I would go and meet them. And we got talking in their sitting room. And I was telling them my story about my parents going to Africa and my father, why he went to Africa, and what his family had been doing in Germany, and a bit about the history of the Jewish scene in the 30s. And he said, "Well, you're Jewish." Well, I said, "Well, I know my father was Jewish, but I'm a Christian." So he explained, "Well, yes, you could be Jewish and believe that Jesus is the Messiah and be a Christian." "Oh, really? Oh, well, I guess you can." So they explained that to me, and they invited me to come to their Friday evening Bible studies. So I was learning more and more how to understand the scriptures from a Hebraic perspective. And then they said, "Well, maybe you'd like to join the British Messianic Jewish Alliance." So I said, "Well, that's fair enough." So when I got the form, it said, "Have you been baptized?" And I thought, well, yes, I was sprinkled when I was a little girl. I was singing in my head to myself. So I'll tick that. But then I later found out that actually that's not baptism in the sense of what the scriptures mean. So I was baptized in the Messianic Fellowship, and that in fact made a big, big difference in my walk with the Lord. I suddenly understood. Everything seemed to be in technicolor, as one person put it, instead of black and white. And I became much more zealous for the things of God and realized that Christianity was not a religion, but rather a relationship, and that we could ask and be in communion with Jesus all the time, in communion with God through Jesus all the time. So that was a new start in life. So at that time there were many visiting speakers to Israel, to Edinburgh from Israel, and one was Lawrence Lambert, a Jewish gentleman who was very well informed in the scriptures and a really good teacher. And his tour was sponsored by Prayer for Israel, a ministry that is in England, and that focused on the congregations and ministries in Israel. So it wasn't long before I was led to support in prayer and financially one of the congregations. So this was at the beginning of the 90s, and at that time there were very few Messianic congregations in Israel. So if you knew one, you soon met the leaders from other congregations. So meantime, I must know about 9 or 10 different congregations and ministries in Israel that are led by Messianic believers. Some I know by name, some I know more intimately. So anyway, Lowe thought having a Messianic fellowship in Edinburgh is all very well, but what about the Jewish people in Glasgow, who would like to come along and celebrate the feasts? There weren't any Messianic fellowships in Glasgow at the time. There were different Gentiles who were interested in learning, so they came across. Many of them realized that, oh yes, they were Jewish as well, although they had been brought up as Christians. So, long story short, the leader of that fellowship was posted to Belize, central Middle America there, and the people from Edinburgh had a congregation in Edinburgh, and the ones from Glasgow, which is the west of Scotland, they met there on a regular basis. Ours was initially a home group, and then when we became too many, we had 2 different venues, one on the outskirts of Edinburgh and one central Edinburgh, to accommodate as many people as possible. And we had meetings every second Shabbat. So that went on for a long time, and it's still going on now. That fellowship is meeting regularly, but sadly only once a month. But it's a blessing to those who come, although it's just a small community, about 20, which isn't very much, but we're a great encouragement to each other, and every now and again somebody comes for the first time and thinks, oh, this is amazing. And they enjoy singing in Hebrew, and they enjoy an exposition of the Torah portion for the particular Shabbat. So for the first 10 years I was on the leadership team of the Messianic Fellowship, but after 10 years I felt it was time to move on and make space for a younger generation. So I moved on and had time to help somebody move into the work and just be there in the background and maybe suggest speakers she could invite, whatever. And my ministry became focused differently. I can't remember quite what. It's more of an encourager and arranging tours for visiting speakers and things like that. And one of my main ministries is also to the church, who are very slow, if at all, interested in bringing the gospel to the Jewish people, recognizing that the Jewish people are in Israel in fulfillment of God's word. That's a full-time job, especially praying about it. And already in the year 2000 I was able to do a course which made the connection between Christianity and Judaism and Israel and the church. And this was a very thorough course, teaching about the Jewishness of Jesus and of the scriptures, touching on anti-Semitism in the church, and then going on to Israel and the present day and the future. So anyway, I think over my course of time I've done about 15 courses, if not more, in different areas, not just in churches and people's homes, and it's been a real encouragement to see the fruits of that. So that's right. So since the year 2010, that's been my ministry, really, to reach out to the church, with limited success, I fear, but the ones and twos have been blessed by this new realization of how to study the scriptures. In the last 5 years, however, Max de Bono de Laurentiis has entered my life on a more regular basis, because he started a small Bible study group weekly on Erev Shabbat. So in the 5 years we've read through the whole of the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah and studied it and come to the conclusion what a blessing it is and how vital it is to live a biblical Torah-orientated lifestyle, not to be redeemed, but because we are redeemed. So that's been a great blessing. In fact, my life has been one of blessing, and I think I must be the most blessed person in the whole world, because I can't think of any difficult times in my life. So that's the story so far.